Alec Busse joins from the Hoosier.com. There has been just a ton going on in the last week, Alec, in regards on the recruiting trail, the IBCA Top 100 over the weekend. But even though there's 100 guys there, there were a few targets to look at specifically. And Floyd Badanga, of course, the head of the class, potential number one recruit in next year, along with Trent Sisley was there. But your first look at Flory, and he's a game changer, man.
Yeah, I was really impressed seeing him in person. I mean, everyone kind of talks about the type of potential he has as a player, but to kind of see it in person for the very first time is a little bit tantalizing, especially when you see the potential he has on the defensive side. I feel like a lot of times kids his age and in events like this, where they're just kind of playing pickup with a group of guys that they don't know, they tend to kind of try and force things on the offensive side. I didn't get that sense from Floyd Badanga. Instead, I was really impressed by his length and his movement and his commitment to just guarding and protecting the rim on the defensive side. There's certainly some tools on the offensive side that are there. He's got a good left hand around the rim. It's something that he's still developing, though. His dunking ability, I think, is incredible. I had one Big Ten assistant that I was sitting next to describe him as a great dunker, which I thought was kind of funny, got a chuckle out of me. In terms of his shooting ability, that's something that it needs a lot of work. The shot mechanics aren't really there at this point of his development, but he's a good athlete, and I don't think it's ever fair to completely count a kid who's about to be a senior in high school out of being able to add something to his game. And Flory's obviously a very good player, so I think that's something that he can add and really kind of start to refine as he starts to continue to get college interest. He's supposed to start taking an official visit to Duke. I believe tomorrow is when it starts, June 20th.
And the word is that it's basically down to Duke and Indiana for Floyd Badanga. He canceled a visit to UK, to Kentucky, and that's something that once Duke got in the mix, people started talking about, well, that was his team that he enjoyed, that he always wanted to play for, which his basketball career has not been that long, but we'll see how that works out. But now it's kind of seeming like it is getting down to those two schools quickly.
Yeah, I think Michigan's also in the mix there a little bit. They hosted him for an official visit pretty recently. And then we know Cincinnati did a really good job of positioning themselves. But yeah, like I said, going to Duke for an official visit this weekend, you kind of added some good context into his personal interest in playing for Duke. And it does seem like Duke is kind of expressing some good interest in him. They had an assistant coach there to watch him this weekend down in Brownsburg. So that was certainly something that was of note to me. There was a lot of coaches that were kind of there watching him and following him around. Auburn was there. Bruce and Stephen Pearl were there. Bill Self from Kansas was there watching him just about every game. And then obviously Indiana had two coaches there watching him at every game too. And it was kind of funny. There was a flock of coaches and a flock of people that just kind of followed Floyd Badanga's top 100 team to the different courts inside the Brownsburg High School gym. So like I said, lots of interest, but Duke, Indiana, Michigan, Cincinnati, and it does seem like Kansas is starting to show some good interest in the top 5 national prospect in the 2024 class.
The thing about Flory is he's at max a 2-year college player, I think, with his talent, I'm going to assume, unless, something different jumped out. And with that fact, while Duke, if you grow up, so, well, Duke is where I always wanted to go. Well, it's not the same. Mike Krzyzewski's not there. So, unless you just want to play for a name, it's not the same Duke that it was. Indiana's not the same Indiana without Bob Knight. It's, those guys at that time made magic. And so we'll see if that has an effect. And if he's thinking about the future, well, Mike Woodson is you want to talk about a tutor for getting to that next level and all the experience that he has around him, the NBA experience, that would seem to give Indiana a hedge in that direction. But nothing matters in the minds of kids when they're making their decisions from what we're saying. But looking at it from the outside, I would think that Indiana's still in really, really good position for all those things combined.
Yeah, you talked about Duke there a little bit. I agree with the idea there, but I think it's also important to recognize that Duke still kind of has this mystique around it, and it has a coolness factor to high school recruits that I think it's kind of hard to deny. And then I think John Shire has done a really good job recruiting in his time as an assistant under Coach K, and then even now taking over as the head coach. I mean, if you look at some of the kids that he was the lead on as a recruiter, I mean, recently like Tariq Whitehead, Derek Lively. He was really impactful in getting Paolo Banchero. He was also really impactful in getting Kyle Filipkowski and Zion Williamson. So John Shire's done a very good job of recruiting, but certainly like Duke has lost some of that mystique with Coach K not being there. And now John Shire kind of has to make it his own program. So I think it'll be interesting to kind of see how he kind of does that in the type of mold that he gives Duke. And then you talk about Indiana and having Mike Woodson be in the NBA for a really long time. I think we've seen and we've heard a lot of kids and a lot of recruits kind of talk about that impact in their recruitment. And we've seen them use the Carmelo Anthony pitch several different times, using Carmelo to talk to guys like Mackenzie Mbako, using Carmelo Anthony and the connection that Mike Woodson has to him with guys like Boogie Fland. And, you put all those things together, and I think that kind of creates a coolness factor. I mean, what kid doesn't want to talk to a future NBA Hall of Famer like Carmelo Anthony, or have that kind of relationship in their back pocket? So Indiana, I think, has a really good pitch. And then Duke is obviously a program that continues to have a lot of momentum on the recruiting trail as well.
And speaking of Indiana recruiting, make sure you go to thehoosier.com. Alex got a ton of great content there. But one of that is I was going to talk about just the group of guys that were on visits last week. But you look overall at the visits that Indiana has gotten, and the difference that this is from 2-3 years ago, just that recently, it's mind-boggling. They have had 9 guys from the 24 class that are all inside the top 50, and basically virtually other than 2, 7 of them are in the top 16. 7 of the top 16 have been on visits to IU. That's big, because you're going to get something. You're not going to get them all, but you're going to get something. And Indiana is really, their recruiting is really been impressive to me by what Mike Woodson and staff have done. It's in raising the Indiana's recruiting this in the last year or two. Very, very impressive.
Yeah, I think back to when Mike Woodson was hired at Indiana, and he kind of spoke about Indiana deserves a spot at the table with the most highly sought after high school recruits. I think were kind of the words or the phrases that he used. And I think there was maybe some doubt from his staff and maybe from people if that was something that he would be able to accomplish right away as Indiana's head coach. Well, in his first full class, he lands 2 really highly talented recruits in Joan Hood-Schifino and Malik Renew, and he turned one of them into a potential lottery pick later this week. So that really helps. And then they are targeting really highly ranked kids. Like you said, I mean, 9 kids ranked in the top 50, and that's not even a fully comprehensive list of the kids that they've hosted for unofficial or official visits on campus in Bloomington. So the best way to win in college sports is to recruit. I kind of always say that I think 70 to 75% of a college basketball or college football head coach's job is to recruit. And I think Mike Woodson understands that pretty well, considering the type of talent that he's bringing to Indiana just for visits. Now, it's one thing to bring kids to campus for visits, right? But you got to get them committed. You got to get them signed. And I think Indiana's well positioned for a lot of these kids. Do I know if they're the favorite? I don't know if they're the undisputed favorite for a lot of them at this point. But I think they're well positioned. And I think that's half the battle when you think about the type of schools that IU's going up against. And that's all you can hope for is give your best pitch, get them on campus, and hope they fall in love with Indiana basketball.
Just some of the guys that have been here in the last week, I think. Jaden Mustaf, I believe, Boogie Fland, Tyler Betsy, and Dylan Harper. Is that right? Did they have those 4 in like the last 10 days?
I don't know about Dylan Harper being on campus at Indiana.
I'm just going off of my memory, but
yeah, I don't know about Dylan Harper being on campus at Indiana, but the other 3 you mentioned there, Jaden Mustaf, you said Boogie Fland, and then Tyler Betsy were all on campus for official visits within the last 2 weeks. Fland and Betsy were on campus last week. Their official visits overlapped a little bit. I heard both of those kind of went pretty well, but I've never heard of an official visit going poorly for a school. that's kind of like a running joke that I like to make because when do visits ever go badly? It seems like. But yeah, those seem to be going pretty well. Like I said, pretty highly contested recruitments. I know Kentucky's trying to get in the mix with Boogie Fland. Alabama would like to also host him for an official visit. And then for Betsy, he took an official visit to UConn at the beginning of the month. And then I think starting today or tomorrow, Tyler Betsy will go to an official visit at Creighton.
And with all these new players coming in, and we've already talked about this, how the offense is going to expectedly be very, very different next year than it was last year when you had Trace Jackson Davis just posted up in the middle. I think this is going to be a much more free-flowing, almost NBA-style offense.
Yeah, I think it has the potential to be this upcoming season. I expect them to use a ton of ball screens this upcoming year. I think that's something that they'll do a lot with Xavier Johnson is put him in a lot of ball screens. It's not something that they did a ton of last season. If you look at some of the advanced numbers that they use in synergy, ball screens were the second most common, or excuse me, post-ups were like the second most common shot attempt that IU had last season, about 13-14% of those. And it should have been, right? Like they had Trace Jackson Davis, who was one of the 2-3 best players in the country, and he averaged 21 points and shot like 58 to 60% from the field on 2-point shots. So that was smart. That should have been the offense. But now they don't have 21 points a game in the paint, and they're going to have to find ways to get high percentage looks at the paint or at the rim. And then you also need to hope that guys like Trey Galloway, guys like Mackenzie Mbako, potentially Ja'Kai Newton, Gabe Cupps are able to make some kick out opportunities out of the pick and roll and out of ball screens that should be open in the corner up at the top of the key. And I think a huge X factor is Kalel Ware's ability to kind of play in pick and pop opportunities this upcoming season. He only shot at like 27% or so last season from beyond the arc, but people always have kind of said, he has potential to be a good shooter at his size. Do I think Kalel Ware is going to be someone who shoots like 38% from three? No, probably not. But let's be a little bit more realistic. If he shoots 33% from three this upcoming season, well, that's something that teams have to respect and teams have to guard. And that really helps space the floor. So if he's able to make some of those catch and shoot opportunities, something that he struggled with a little bit last season as well, then I think things kind of really open up for Indiana offensively. But in a nutshell, I would expect the ball to be in Xavier Johnson's hands a lot this upcoming season and allow him to kind of make plays out of ball screens.
Absolutely. Right now, we're in the June period where coaches can live period where they can watch players, but only in high school sanctioned events. I know that Austin Schwartz is one of the guys that the staff was out watching.
Yeah, I think that was down in North Carolina this past weekend. Schwartz is ranked like in the 130s by Rivals, but we're doing a basketball ranking update this week. He's someone that I would expect to really kind of shoot up the rankings. When 24/7 did their rankings update, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, he shot up to the top 50. He's in the 40s now by 24/7. So I'd expect a similar kind of jump for him at Rivals. He's someone who shoots the lights out. He shoots the cover off the ball, whatever phrase you want to use, he does it. He's a huge bucket, super pure shot off the bounce, catch and shoot opportunities. He plays on the same AAU team as Jaden Mustafa, Boo Williams Elite on the Nike UIBL circuit. I really enjoy watching Austin Schwartz shoot. His playmaking ability is something that still needs to develop and still needs to kind of be refined, especially off the bounce and his passing. But those are things that he's showing flashes of and they are improving. So Schwartz is one of my favorite kids in the entire 2024 class. And if I was in Indiana, I would be shooting hard for a visit because I love that kid's shooting ability. And I think there's a lot of schools who would love to have a shooter like that.
Well, and that brings up the point, Indiana, with that vacant scholarship still, what do you think that they're going to do with that?
So in a mailbag that I had published last night on the Hoosier, someone asked me to kind of give the odds for the different what happened to that last scholarship. We know Joey Hart committed to Kentucky on Saturday morning, I believe it was. And then we've seen him kind of connected to some other guys like Simeon Wilcher and Chris Johnson, who both got out of national letters of intent to North Carolina for Wilcher. He's since committed to St. John's, and then Johnson at Kansas. He's still waiting to, I think, officially get out of that national letter of intent, but we've seen Indiana have some connection there. I don't know if they'll push super hard for Johnson. They didn't push super hard for Wilcher. I think the one guy that they would maybe like the most is Antonio Reeves, a potential transfer from Kentucky. He's been rumored to heavily be interested in entering the transfer portal. He's taking summer classes at Illinois State, which is where his basketball career originally started at the college level. Jeff Goodman reported that. I had some sources indicate that to me as well. He's averaged about 14 points a game last season at UK, made about 40% of his threes. But within the last week or so, things kind of seem to be shifting a little bit more towards the idea of him potentially returning to Kentucky, which would be big for UK because we know the struggles that they've had with building a roster this upcoming season, especially an experienced roster at UK. But I think if Reeves does hit the portal, I would expect Indiana to show interest in him. He'd be a perfect fit for them at the 2. Brings good size at about 6'5", 6'6", I believe. And like I said, a really good shooter. Other schools involved there, Michigan, Illinois, Oklahoma, and Memphis, I would expect to also kind of show some interest in Reeves.
And I hate to bring it up, but players possibly leaving West Virginia after Bob Huggins' resignation there. There's going to be player fallout without question with the coaching change, I would expect, although it's kind of, I don't want to say late, but it's getting, the hour's getting late for transfers into programs to really to get integrated, because the workouts have started and all of that. So you want to get you would think you'd want to, if you're going to fill that spot, Indiana would want to do it as soon as possible. But now you've got this other fallout.
Yeah, I don't want to speculate too much on specific names at West Virginia just because I don't know yet. I haven't talked to anyone really specifically about one individual player or a group of individual players at West Virginia. It's obviously kind of a sensitive time over there in Morgantown with everything that's kind of going on there. I will say that I think the NCAA allows like a 30-day additional window for guys to enter the transfer portal if a coach is fired, and I think that that's probably fair. Like those kids probably should get a free transfer if they already used one to West Virginia. But I think that there's some things going on there at West Virginia that are worth monitoring. We don't know if Indiana would have interest in any of those guys. I know Jesse Edwards is someone who transferred to West Virginia from Syracuse before the season. Like, he's a good player, but that's on somebody that Indiana would have interest in. I wouldn't expect he plays in the front court. Kirk Risa, not someone I would expect Indiana to have a ton of interest in. He's a point guard. Who's just have their point guard in Xavier Johnson. So, like I said, I don't want to speculate too much on names there and the type of people that could decide to enter the transfer portal from West Virginia, but definitely worth monitoring in the next couple of days or weeks about what kind of happens there as far as an interim head coach. Do they do a full hiring search at this point? Just the whole situation at West Virginia is definitely going to be worth following.